All right. Well, I think there are a couple of important points I need to bring out um, before we go back to Genesis, and that is to just explore a little bit the nature of the community, the ethos of the community, and the character of the community that produced the Book of Revelation. And then look at one motif that we did cover with regard to the Tree of Life, but I want to point out something kind of more starkly that will kind of reinforce what I'm arguing about the nature of the community there in Revelation. Because this is gonna dovetail into some speculations that I want to make about, the true nature of Jesus or Lucifer. It's quite apparent to me that, and I wish I had actually read Margaret Barker before embarking on this video, because she supposedly has some very good insights into the Book of Revelation, who wrote it and when and so on. And she's coming at it from a little bit more of an esoteric perspective as well, which would be very helpful. But I really don't intend to do anything too in-depth on that for this particular series. So, but I probably will get to her writings at some point, and maybe do something on it. But all I wanted to really say here is that the community out of which Revelation comes, in my mind, appears to be not only very Jewish, not only Judeo-centric, and I'll explain why I say that shortly, but even very distrustful of Paul. I think we're seeing something that's more Jamesian. I say that in part because of the letter to Thyatira, one of the seven churches one of the seven churches in Asia Minor. This is in chapter 2. The letter to Thyatira sounds very much like what we see in Acts 15, where the council of Jerusalem under James comes together, and they don't want to bind Gentiles to the Jewish law, but there are a few principles that they do want to impose on Gentile converts, and one of them being that they are not to eat meat sacrificed to idols, right? Or to eat anything that's been strangled. That's what is written here to the church of Thyatira. It says that they have, the angel says, I have one thing against you, and that is that you eat things sacrificed to idols. Whereas Paul was a little more live and let live. Paul, Acts and Revelation say, this is forbidden, period. Whereas Paul was like, well, it's really nothing. He took more of a don't ask, don't tell, or hear no evil, see no evil. So his position when he's writing to Corinthians is, it doesn't matter if you eat it or not. But, don't do it if it's going to cause your brother to stumble. I mean, he doesn't even have a problem if you walk into a temple, a pagan temple, and eat the meat. If you don't know that it was if you don't know that it was sacrificed to a pagan god, and you don't ask and you don't find out, well, then it's really nothing to worry too much about. So that's one reason I think this is very much more more of a pro-law, more Judaic even than the Pauline communities would have been. If the James community was following Jesus' teachings, and Jesus did teach very clearly, although cryptically, that Yahweh was the adversary, then I think the main point of contention between Paul and James was more about whether Jews had to continue keeping certain facets of the law. And Paul's answer was no. He does not look very highly or favorably upon the law. He does say that it did serve a purpose while it lasted, but that under the new dispensation, there was no need for it. The James community appeared to take a different stance, at least as regards the Jews. And that's why there's this huge controversy in Acts towards the end of the book, and why James' elders make an accusation about Paul, confronting him directly. But Paul, being all things to all men, he goes into the temple. They want to test him. So he goes and he joins them inside the temple, and he does whatever it takes to get them off his back. And but anyway, in spite of the anti-Yahwist nature of the book of Revelation, for all of its anti-Yahwism, it's still Judeo-centric, very, very much so. The community there is. But what's interesting about this particular community is that it is not Jewish in the normative sense, nor is it Christian as we would think of Christianity today. So this is a community that dies out fairly quickly after the destruction of Jerusalem by the Roman armies and after the leveling of the Second Temple. So it really doesn't thrive much past AD 70 or much past the first century CE. Which is why I think it eventually gets incorporated into the Bible. Because the church really had no idea who wrote it and what its purpose was originally, when the church decided to make it part of its canon. It wasn't really an official decision. The church really didn't make, as far as I know, an official decision to incorporate it. It sort of over time just became accepted, kind of silently. One of the big reasons, though, and I wouldn't just base it on one letter to the Church of Thyatira about eating meat sacrificed to idols. Really a central reason why we must say that Revelation is so Judeo-centric is because of two verses at the end of the book, and that is 21 verse 8 and 22:15. So I'll go ahead and read those. Actually, before I get to that, let me just say there's actually one other thing I want to talk about that reinforces this concept, and that is, well, the general theme of the book. It's very anti-Western. It's very anti-Roman. The sea beast is viewed as Rome in terms of its political dimension. And there's a land beast and a sea beast, so there's two sides to this beast. And there's a lot of demonization of Babylon here. The city that is destroyed, which I think in this case is Jerusalem. It's not talking about Rome here. It's not describing Rome as Babylon, but Jerusalem, the city that actually gets destroyed. And Babylon does get destroyed in Revelation, so it would have to be referring to Jerusalem. The whore of Babylon here is being applied. The symbolism of Babylon is being applied to those Jews who are excoriated here in Revelation in chapter 2 verse 9 and 3 verse 9 as the synagogue of Satan. Those who say they are Jews but are not, as he says. So in other words, those who would not denounce Yahweh in favor of the Christ are considered not to be true Jews. And they are representative of the whore of Babylon. So we know from that alone that the book is very Jewish. And then finally, as I said, Revelation 21 verse 8 and 22 verse 15, these two verses contain a litany of sins for which one will suffer in the lake of fire, also known as the second death. So 21, I'll read it quickly. 21:8. 21:8 says, "But the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers," some texts say those who practice magic, "idolaters, and all liars, shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death." And then a similar list appears in 22:15. I'll read 14 and 15. "Blessed are those who do his commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life, and may enter through the gates into the city. But outside are dogs and sorcerers and sexually immoral and murderers and idolaters, and whoever loves and practices a lie." So the inclusion of sorcery and magic and idolatry in particular tells me that this is a very Judeo-centric community. Because it strikes me as very Yahwistic, very exclusivist, very sectarian, which is very much a Jewish characteristic. You know, Jesus in the Gospels is saying, and we'll get to these texts down the line and talk about them in more detail, but Jesus actually contrasts himself with Yahweh, particularly during the 40-day trial in the wilderness, where Satan comes and tempts Jesus. That whole story is intended to parallel the 40-year wilderness wandering of the Jews in the desert with Yahweh and what they experienced under Yahweh. You know, Yahweh is basically starving them to death, and then he gets angry when they complain and he punishes them. Whereas Jesus is preaching to the crowds, and when they get hungry, he doesn't get angry that they're complaining about being hungry. He simply does a miracle and produces bread and fish and feeds the crowd. But yet, you're seeing a very severe picture here, a very Yahwistic picture, where the community in Revelation is saying, if you don't give up your idols and worship our God, if you don't worship the Lamb exclusively, you will have your part in the lake of fire, which is the second death. So, the sectarianism didn't go away for these people. The sectarianism remained. The Jewish sectarian mindset that they had, that the Yahwists had, is a feature of this anti-Yahweh Jewish community as well. It really just came down to which God you're going to worship. Are you going to worship Yahweh, or are you going to worship Jesus, aka Lucifer, since he takes on that identity in Revelation 22:16. So this is going to segue directly into the next one. Well, hold on a minute before I end this. I do want to say one quick thing, which will help us segue into the next video as we start creeping our way now back into Genesis. Revelation 2:7, Revelation 22:14. These verses, I think there's maybe a third or a fourth verse in Revelation also that discusses the tree of life. I think 22, the first couple verses also bring up the tree of life. You notice that there isn't some special theological teaching regarding original sin or promotion to a higher stage of existence, as you might find, or as you do find in Orthodox, with a small o, Christianity. All you find is Jesus, the Son of Man, here in Revelation, saying that he is going to restore the tree of life to those who overcome. In other words, he's simply going to reinstate that state of affairs which prevailed before Yahweh expelled Adam and Eve from the tree of life. Which is significant in light of our thesis here in this series that Jesus in fact is Lucifer, that he is the snake depicted in Genesis 3, who simply wanted Adam and Eve to become like the gods, to have knowledge, to have gnosis, to be able to discern with greater maturity through experience the difference between good and evil, and who wanted them to be able to become like the gods, which Yahweh resented. So yeah, with that, we're going to segue into the next video. I'm going to title that one, Who Was Lucifer Really? I have some speculations. Again, it's pure speculation. But there are indications, strong indications, that Lucifer is one of the Elohim, one of the gods, who is in a millennia-long rivalry with Yahweh. And so I ask the question, can Lucifer be entirely trusted in spite of the fact that he is anti-Yahweh? Now, is he preferable to Yahweh? I would say on the surface, absolutely. Because he is sort of the Sumerian Enki. He is the Prometheus of our story. He's promoting mankind on some level. He's promoting us. He wants us to have gnosis. If you look in the Sumerian texts, Enki plays the role of enabling us to procreate. He allows us to become sexual beings and to procreate, which Enlil, his brother, was absolutely furious about. The goal was not for us to populate like rabbits. The goal was to create a limited number of us to do labor that the gods didn't want to do themselves. He does appear to intercede for us in certain ways, and he helps to preserve humankind through the flood. So, but is this just a means to an end? Is this just a means to one-upping Yahweh so that he can rise to the top and be the Most High, or be like the Most High, be as the Most High, which is what Yahweh accuses him of doing in Isaiah 14:12 through 14. So let's go there in the next video.